It was a dark and stormy night when the young woman arrived at the hospital. She had been in a terrible car accident and was rushed to the emergency room for treatment. The doctors and nurses worked quickly to stabilize her condition, but as the night wore on, it became clear that she was not going to make it. As the young woman lay dying in her hospital bed, her family and friends gathered around her, tears streaming down their faces. But as they sat in silence, watching her last breath, they began to notice something strange. The room was becoming colder and colder, and a strange feeling of unease filled the air. Suddenly, the young woman's eyes shot open and she sat up in bed. Her face was twisted in a grotesque expression of terror, and her voice was a low, guttural growl. "Leave this place," she hissed. "Get out before it's too late." The family and friends were paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. But then, a nurse came running into the room, her face pale with terror. "There's something wrong with the hospital," she whispered. "We have to get out of here before it's too late." The group quickly gathered their things and ran out of the hospital, but as they left, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them. They looked back at the hospital and saw that the windows were glowing with an eerie green light, and then they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from inside. They looked back at the hospital and saw that the windows were glowing with an eerie green light, and then they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from inside. They never spoke of that night again, but they all knew that something sinister and evil had taken hold of that hospital, and they never went back, for fear of what they might find. It was a quiet evening shift at the hospital when the nurse heard strange noises coming from one of the patient rooms. She assumed it was just the usual creaks and groans of an old building. But as the noises grew louder and more persistent, she knew something was off. Cautiously, she made her way to the patient room in question and opened the door to find it empty. The bed was made and all of the patient's belongings were gone. But the noises were still coming from inside the room. She looked around, confused and a little scared. And that's when she noticed something strange. The bed was made and all of the patient's belongings were gone. But the noises were still coming from inside the room. She looked around, confused and a little scared. And that's when she noticed something strange. The walls of the room were covered in a thick, black substance that seemed to be moving and pulsing. The nurse didn't know what it was, but she knew she needed to get out of there. She turned to run, but the door was now blocked by the same black substance. She was trapped. Suddenly, the patient's belongings began to shake and move on their own. The nurse could see ghostly figures emerging from the shadows, reaching out to her with gnarled fingers. They were the spirits of the hospital's past patients, trapped in the room and unable to leave. The nurse screamed for help, but her voice was muffled by the thick black substance that had now engulfed her entire body. She was pulled into the darkness, never to be seen again. The hospital staff searched for the nurse, but she was never found. They sealed off the patient room, but strange noises and sightings of ghostly figures have been reported by staff and patients ever since. Some say that the nurse's spirit is still trapped in that room, forever doomed to be a part of the hospital's haunted past. It was a quiet night at the hospital when the janitor, Jack, was making his rounds. He had been working at the hospital for years and had never experienced anything out of the ordinary. But as he was cleaning the operating room, He heard strange noises coming from the corner of the room. At first, he thought it was just the usual creaks and groans of the old building. But as the noises grew louder, he realized that something was not right. He cautiously approached the corner and found a hidden door he had never noticed before. Without thinking, Jack opened the door and was met with a sight that sent chills down his spine. The room was filled with old surgical equipment and medical instruments, covered in rust and cobwebs. But what really scared him was the figure of a man standing in the corner, dressed in old-fashioned surgical attire. The figure didn't move or speak, but Jack could feel its size boring into him. He tried to speak, but his voice was caught in his throat. He realized that the figure was not a living person, but a ghost. It was the ghost of a former doctor who had been known for his unethical practices and had been banned from the hospital. Jack quickly closed the door and ran out of the operating room, but he could still feel the ghost's presence following him. He knew that he needed to leave the hospital before it was too late.